Hollywood is buzzing with shock tonight, after what industry insiders are calling the most explosive celebrity meltdown in late-night television history. Nicolas Cage, the Academy Award-winning actor, known for his intense performances and unpredictable personality, was forcibly removed from The Late Show with Stephen Colbert following a confrontation so volatile that security had to intervene. What started as a routine promotional appearance turned into a career-defining clash that exposed the dark side of both men and left viewers absolutely stunned. Make sure you smash that subscribe button, because this story contains exclusive behind-the-scenes details that will completely blow your mind. The shocking truth about what really happened between these two powerhouse personalities goes deeper than anyone imagined, and we've got insider information that reveals a toxic power struggle that was years in the making. According to sources close to the production, the seeds of disaster were planted weeks before Cage even entered the Ed Sullivan Theater. The legendary actors team had specifically requested Stephen's show for his latest film promotion, believing the host's reputation for thoughtful interviews would provide the perfect platform for discussing his complex new role. But what they didn't know was that Stephen's writers had prepared an entirely different kind of interview, one designed to provoke the famously intense actor into one of his legendary outbursts. Stephen has always been fascinated by Nicolas, revealed a longtime production insider who witnessed the pre-show preparations. But it wasn't admiration. It was more like a scientist studying a volatile chemical reaction. He kept talking about wanting to see the real Nicolas Cage, the one from all those memes and viral videos. It was clear he wanted to push buttons. The warning signs started during the pre-interview coordination process. While most talk shows work closely with guests to ensure smooth conversations, Stephen's team allegedly refused to share their planned approach with Cage's representatives. They kept saying Stephen prefers organic conversations, that scripted interviews don't capture authentic moments, explained a publicist familiar with the negotiations. But anyone who knows Nicolas knows that organic can be dangerous territory. With someone that passionate, behind closed doors, crew members described an atmosphere of anticipation that felt more like preparing for a gladiator match than a celebrity interview. Stephen was reportedly obsessing over Cage's most infamous moments, studying viral clips and internet memes with the kind of intensity usually reserved for investigative journalism. He had this whole folder of Nicolas's wildest interviews and movie scenes, recalled a stage manager who requested anonymity. He kept saying he wanted to find the line between the actor and the character. It felt like he was planning to poke a sleeping tiger. The tension escalated dramatically when Cage arrived at the studio that afternoon for rehearsals. Witnesses described the actor as surprisingly calm and professional during his initial arrival, taking time to greet crew members and expressing genuine enthusiasm about discussing his craft. But Stephen's behavior during their pre-show meeting set off immediate alarm bells among staff who knew both men's reputations. The energy in the room was electric, but not in a good way, observed a camera operator who's worked hundreds of celebrity interviews. Nicolas was being totally normal, asking about Stephen's family and cracking jokes with the crew. But Stephen was studying him like a specimen under a microscope. He kept making these little comments designed to get a reaction, testing the waters. What made the situation even more combustible was the personal history between the two men that few people knew about. Industry sources reveal that Stephen had harbored a complicated relationship with Cage's work since the early 2000s, publicly mocking the actor's intense performances while privately expressing jealousy about his Oscar win and box office success. The late-night host had made Cage the subject of numerous monologue jokes over the years, often portraying him as unhinged or desperate for attention. Stephen has this thing about actors who don't fit the traditional Hollywood mold, explained a former show writer who left the program after witnessing several uncomfortable celebrity encounters. He presents himself as this intellectual, measured guy, but he's actually intimidated by people who express genuine emotion without filter. Nicholas represents everything Stephen thinks he's too sophisticated for, but secretly envies. The backstage and atmosphere grew increasingly charged as showtime approached. Makeup artists and wardrobe staff noticed Cage seemed to be picking up on the strange energy, becoming slightly more animated and asking pointed questions about the interview format. Meanwhile, Stephen was reportedly pacing in his dressing room, going over his research one final time and making last-minute adjustments that his own producers described as aggressive. "You could feel the electricity building," described an audience coordinator who helped seat guests before the taping. "The crew was on edge because they know both of these guys' reputations. Stephen can be calculating and mean when he wants to be. And Nicholas, well, everyone knows what happens when Nicholas gets pushed too far. It was like watching someone load a cannon next to a powder magazine." As the cameras prepared to roll and the studio audience settled into their seats, production assistants were already positioning additional security personnel around the stage. An unusual precaution that speaks to how volatile everyone expected the encounter to become. The clash between Stephen's calculated provocations and Cage's legendary intensity was about to create television history. Nobody could have predicted just how spectacular the explosion would be when these two forces finally collided on live television. What unfolded next will be studied in television schools as the perfect example of how not to handle a volatile guest. As the cameras rolled and Stephen delivered his opening monologue, viewers immediately noticed something different about his energy. There was a predatory gleam in his eyes that suggested he was hunting for more than just laughs. When he introduced Nicolas Cage, his tone carried an undercurrent of mockery disguised as admiration that immediately put industry watchers on high alert. Please welcome a man who's given us some of the most memorable performances in cinema history, Academy Award winner Nicolas Cage. The way Stephen emphasized memorable while air-quoting made it clear this wasn't going to be a typical promotional interview. When Cage bounded onto the stage with his characteristic energy and genuine enthusiasm, the contrast between his authentic excitement and Stephen's barely concealed agenda was painfully obvious to everyone watching. The interview began with seemingly innocent questions about Cage's latest film, but seasoned viewers could see Stephen laying elaborate traps with surgical precision. "So, Nicholas, you're known for your intense method approach to roles. Some might say you take it to extraordinary levels. How do you know when you've crossed the line from dedication into, well, let's call it performance art?" The question was loaded with condescension, suggesting that Cage's acclaimed method acting was somehow a joke rather than serious craft. Cage, ever passionate about his work, responded with characteristic intensity. "Stephen, I believe in total commitment to character. When audiences invest their time and money in a film, they deserve to see an actor who's explored every facet of that person's soul. There's no such thing as going too far when you're serving the story." His answer was pure Cage, earnest, philosophical, and delivered with the kind of conviction that has made him a cult icon. But Stephen wasn't interested in genuine discussion about craft. "Soul, interesting word choice," he said with a smirk that made the studio audience shift uncomfortably. "Because I have to ask, and I think America wants to know, where exactly is the line between exploring a character's soul and just losing your mind on camera? I mean, we've all seen the compilations." The reference to internet meme compilations of Cage's most intense moments was a deliberate provocation, and everyone in the studio could feel the temperature drop. Cage's famous intensity flickered across his face as he processed what was happening. "I'm sorry, Stephen, but are you suggesting that my commitment to my craft is somehow mental instability?" "Oh, no, no, no," Stephen said with fake concern that fooled no one. "I'm just wondering if there's a method to what some people might call madness. I mean, your reputation precedes you, doesn't it? The stories from sets, the, let's say, passionate discussions with directors." The host was clearly fishing for a reaction, trying to bait Cage into one of his legendary outbursts for the entertainment of his audience. Those sitting close to the stage could see Cage's jaw tighten as he realized he was walking into an ambush. "Stephen, I've worked with some of the finest directors in the industry. Francis Ford Coppola, David Lynch, Spike Jonze. They appreciate actors who bring everything to the table. If that passion makes some people uncomfortable, perhaps they should examine their own relationship with authentic emotion." The response was brilliant, turning Stephen's attack back on broader cultural issues while defending his artistic integrity. But instead of backing down, Stephen seemed energized by having struck a nerve. "Authentic emotion? I love that phrase," he said with a harsh laugh. "Though I have to wonder, and correct me if I'm wrong, isn't there something performative about always being on? Like, do you ever just turn it off? Be a normal person having a normal conversation?" The studio fell uncomfortably silent. Stephen had just essentially called one of Hollywood's most respected method actors a fake, suggesting that his entire persona was calculated performance rather than genuine passion. Cage's eyes flashed with something that made veteran crew members instinctively step back. "Normal?" Cage repeated, his voice taking on the edge that every film fan recognizes as the moment before an explosion. "Stephen, what exactly do you consider normal? Sitting behind a desk making jokes about people who pour their hearts into their work? Mocking artists who refuse to phone it in just because it makes you uncomfortable?" The audience was dead silent, now realizing they were witnessing something far beyond typical late-night banter. This was becoming a genuine confrontation between two worldviews: Stephen's calculated cynicism versus Cage's unfiltered passion. Production assistants could be seen frantically signaling from the wings, but Stephen ignored all attempts to steer him back to safer territory. "I'm not mocking anyone," Stephen said, though his tone suggested otherwise. "I'm just trying to understand the Nicolas Cage experience, because from where I sit, it sometimes looks less like method acting and more like, well, method something else. Method chaos, maybe?" The cheap shot hit its mark, and everyone in the studio could see Cage's famous composure beginning to crack. "Method chaos?" Cage's voice rose slightly, that legendary intensity finally breaking through his media training. "Stephen, do you have any idea what it takes to create something real in a world full of artificial everything? Do you understand the courage it requires to be vulnerable on camera, to expose your soul for the sake of truth?" Stephen leaned back, with a satisfied smirk, clearly pleased that he'd finally gotten under his guest's skin. "Truth, vulnerability. Those are big words, Nicholas. But isn't it possible that what you call truth, others might call, let's say, self-indulgent overacting?" The insult hung in the air like a live grenade. Several audience members actually gasped, while others looked around uncertainly, unsure whether this was still entertainment or something much more serious. Cage sat perfectly still for what felt like an eternity, his face cycling through emotions. That would have been fascinating to watch if the situation weren't so genuinely uncomfortable. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet but loaded with controlled fury that made everyone in the room hold their breath. The explosion was coming, and it was going to be spectacular. What happened next will be replayed on social media for years to come as one of the most spectacular celebrity meltdowns ever caught on live television. The insult about self-indulgent overacting was the match that lit the fuse, and when Nicolas Cage finally exploded, it was with the full force of his legendary intensity unleashed without any Hollywood filter. "Self-indulgent?" Cage's voice started low but began building like a gathering storm. "Self-indulgent?" The second repetition came out as a roar that made the entire studio audience jump in their seats. He shot up from his chair with such sudden violence that Stephen actually recoiled, his smug expression evaporating as he realized he had unleashed something he couldn't control. "You want to see self-indulgent, Stephen?" Cage continued, his voice reaching the operatic levels that have made him an internet legend. Self-indulgent is sitting behind a desk every night making cheap jokes about people who actually risk something for their art. Self-indulgent is thinking you're some kind of intellectual because you can read cue cards and mock genuine passion. The studio fell into absolute chaos. Security personnel immediately moved closer to the stage, while production assistants frantically tried to signal the cameras to cut away. But the operators seemed frozen, torn between following protocol and capturing what was clearly television. History in the making. It was like watching a masterclass in controlled fury, described a sound technician who caught every decibel of Cage's legendary voice. He wasn't just angry, he was righteous, and it was terrifying and magnificent at the same time. Stephen, clearly in over his head, attempted to regain control with nervous laughter. "Nicholas, hey, calm down. It's just television. We're having a conversation here. Maybe take it down a notch?" But telling Nicolas Cage to take it down a notch was like asking a hurricane to please be more considerate of the beachfront property. "Calm down?" Cage's voice reached levels that seemed to shake the very foundations of the Ed Sullivan Theater. "You spend the entire interview trying to humiliate me, questioning my sanity, mocking my life's work, and then you tell me to calm down? Do you have any idea what you've done here tonight, Stephen?" By now, the show's executive producer had rushed onto the stage, desperately trying to manage a situation that had spiraled completely out of control. But Cage was in full Nicolas Cage mode now, and nothing was going to stop the volcanic eruption of decades of pent-up frustration with exactly this kind of treatment from the entertainment establishment. "You want authentic emotion, Stephen? You want to see the real Nicolas Cage?" he continued, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper that somehow carried more menace than his shouting. "Here's authentic. I've spent 40 years pouring my soul into characters, taking risks that other actors wouldn't dream of, creating moments of genuine human truth on screen. And people like you reduce it all to memes and mockery because you're too scared to feel anything real yourselves." The audience was in complete shock. Some people were actually crying, overwhelmed by the raw emotion pouring from the stage. Others were recording on their phones despite security's attempts to stop them, knowing they were witnessing something that would define both men's careers forever. Stephen, his face pale and sweating, made one final desperate attempt to salvage the situation. "Nicholas, please, you're making a scene. This is supposed to be fun, entertainment. The audience came here to have a good time, not to watch you have a breakdown." The word breakdown was the final straw. Cage turned toward Stephen with such intensity that the host actually pushed his chair back from his desk. "Breakdown?" he roared, his voice now reaching mythical proportions. "This isn't a breakdown, Stephen. This is a breakthrough. This is what happens when someone finally calls you out for being a mean-spirited bully who hides behind comedy to avoid taking any real risks." Security was now actively moving toward the stage, but Cage wasn't finished delivering his opus of righteous fury. "You sit there, night after night, safe behind your desk, making jokes about people who actually put themselves on the line for their art. You mock passion because you don't have any. You ridicule intensity because you're afraid of your own emotions." The executive producer was frantically making cutting motions to the camera operators, but they seemed mesmerized by the spectacle unfolding before them. This wasn't just a celebrity meltdown. This was a manifesto, a declaration of war against everyone who had ever dismissed genuine artistic passion as mere eccentricity. "Mr. Cage," the head of security said, approaching cautiously like someone trying to calm a wild animal, "we need you to please sit down and—" "Don't!" Cage whirled around, his eyes blazing with an intensity that made the security guard actually step backward. "Don't you dare try to silence me now. This man invited me onto his show, ambushed me with personal attacks, questioned my sanity, mocked my life's work, and now you want me to sit down and be quiet? Not happening." Stephen, clearly terrified by what he had unleashed, made one last attempt to regain control. "Security, escort Mr. Cage from the building. He's clearly having some kind of episode and—" "Episode?" Cage's voice reached such heights that light fixtures seemed to vibrate. "The only episode here is your pathetic attempt to boost your failing ratings by humiliating your guests. But you picked the wrong actor to mess with tonight, Stephen. You wanted to see the real Nicolas Cage? Congratulations! You got him!" As security moved in, Cage delivered his final devastating blow. "You know what the difference is between us, Stephen? When I leave here tonight, I'll still be an artist who risks everything for truth. You'll still be a coward who hides behind jokes because you're too scared to feel anything real." The studio erupted into chaos as security attempted to escort the still-raging Cage from the stage, but he wasn't going quietly. The man who had given us some of cinema's most unforgettable moments was creating his greatest performance yet, and it was all completely, terrifyingly real. The fallout from Nicolas Cage's volcanic eruption began before the echo of his final words had faded from the studio. Within seconds, cell phone footage from terrified audience members was flooding every social media platform on Earth, despite CBS Security's desperate attempts to confiscate devices. By the time Cage had been escorted to his dressing room, still delivering passionate monologues about artistic integrity to anyone within earshot, your Cage vs. Colbert was trending globally, with over 50 million views in the first hour alone. What happened backstage in those crucial moments has been described by witnesses as both surreal and oddly beautiful. Nicolas wasn't angry anymore once he got away from the cameras, revealed a makeup artist who helped him collect his belongings. He was actually calm, almost serene, like he'd finally said everything he'd been holding inside for decades. He kept thanking the crew and apologizing for the chaos, but you could tell he didn't regret a single word. Meanwhile, Stephen sat alone on his devastated stage, visibly shaking as production assistants tried to figure out how to salvage what was left of the show. The audience had been dismissed early amid unprecedented chaos, with many viewers openly expressing their shock at Stephen's behavior and their admiration for Cage's passionate defense of his craft. "I've never seen anything like it," said one audience member whose phone video would eventually accumulate 100 million views. "Nicolas Cage just gave the performance of his lifetime, and it wasn't even acting." Behind closed doors at CBS, emergency meetings were already underway, as executives realized they were facing the most damaging celebrity incident in network history. The phones were ringing off the hook before Nicolas even left the building, disclosed a network insider who witnessed the panic firsthand. Advertisers were pulling out, other celebrities were canceling appearances, and social media was absolutely destroying Stephen. We knew we had a catastrophe that could end careers and cancel shows. But the real earthquake came when Cage's representatives released a statement that sent shockwaves through the entertainment industry. Unlike typical Hollywood damage control, this response was as passionate and uncompromising as the man himself. Mr. Cage's reaction tonight was the natural response of any artist who has been systematically humiliated for his dedication to his craft. The statement read, "What viewers witnessed was not a breakdown, but a breakthrough. A moment when someone finally called out the toxic culture of mockery that has infected entertainment journalism." The revelation that Cage's outburst was being positioned not as a mental health crisis, but as a righteous stand for artistic integrity, completely changed the narrative. Within hours, fellow actors, directors, and industry professionals began sharing their own stories of being mocked or dismissed for taking their craft seriously. Artists United became a rallying cry for creative professionals who felt vindicated by Cage's spectacular defense of passionate artistry. The entertainment industry's response was swift and unprecedented. A-list actors began publicly supporting Cage's stance, with many sharing their own experiences of being ridiculed for emotional commitment to their roles. "Nicolas said what we've all been thinking," tweeted one Oscar-winning actress, whose comment received 2 million likes within hours. "There's nothing wrong with caring deeply about your work. The problem is with people who mock passion because they don't understand it." Perhaps most damaging to Stephen was the response from his own industry colleagues. Late-night hosts who typically maintain professional solidarity began distancing themselves from his tactics, with several making pointed comments about the difference between comedy and cruelty. "You can be funny without being mean," said one rival host during his own monologue. What happened to Nicholas was just bullying disguised as entertainment. The ratings collapse was immediate and catastrophic. Stephen's show lost 70% of its audience in the week following the incident, with sponsors fleeing so rapidly that entire commercial breaks had to be filled with public service announcements. Industry analysts began openly questioning whether The Late Show could survive what many were calling the most self-destructive interview in television history. Meanwhile, Cage experienced something unprecedented in his decades-long career: universal acclaim for being authentically himself. His passionate defense of artistic integrity resonated with millions of viewers who had grown tired of cynical celebrity culture. Movie studios began reaching out with prestige projects, recognizing that Cage's reputation had been transformed from internet meme to artistic hero overnight. "Nicholas showed us what real strength looks like," posted one fan whose comment received 500,000 likes. "He stood up for every artist who's ever been mocked for caring too much." The incident sparked a broader cultural conversation about the treatment of passionate, unconventional artists in a cynical media landscape. Film schools began analyzing Cage's performance as an example of authentic emotion in an artificial world. Psychology professors discussed the difference between genuine intensity and manufactured drama. Even business schools started using the incident as a case study in how personal vendettas can destroy professional reputations. 6 months later, the consequences continue to reshape entertainment culture. Stephen's show remains on the air, but he's become a shadow of his former self, paranoid, defensive, and desperately trying to rebuild his shattered image. Multiple sources suggest that CBS executives are quietly negotiating his exit, unwilling to admit publicly that their star has become toxic to both guests and audiences. Cage, meanwhile, has been elevated to iconic status as someone who refused to apologize for his passion. He's received critical acclaim for several new projects, with directors specifically seeking him out because of his reputation for total commitment. His social media following exploded, filled with fans who appreciate his authenticity in a world of calculated personas. "Sometimes you have to roar," he said, in his only direct comment about the incident during a recent film festival appearance, "especially when you're defending something you believe in with every fiber of your being." The Nicolas Cage versus Stephen Colbert showdown will be remembered as the moment when authentic passion finally fought back against cynical mockery, and won decisively. It proved that genuine emotion and artistic integrity will always triumph over calculated cruelty disguised as entertainment. The real winner wasn't just Cage. It was every artist who's ever been told that caring deeply about their work makes them crazy. What do you think about this explosive confrontation? Was Cage right to unleash his legendary fury, or did Stephen push him too far? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Smash that subscribe button for more shocking celebrity revelations, and hit that notification bell so you never miss the stories that are reshaping Hollywood's power dynamics forever.